And hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome again. And please make sure you get some food. I think there's still some food left over there, so please make sure you get some food. I know we're working through lunch today, and I just want to thank everyone for the amount of effort that you've put into this going forward, and the amount of effort that you'll continue to do so. We know we can count on that. So a lot of good comments and good discussions. Looking forward to another productive day. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jose and let us get started with the agenda. Please, though, if you have any phone calls you need to make, try and leave the room to not disrupt anybody, but also make sure you get food, and so we can keep working throughout this, the time we have together this afternoon. Okay, Jose.
Thanks, Nick. We have a purpose for this meeting, and we will cover a few items. Number one, we will introduce the modeling team, given the recent changes with the principal modeler. The modeling team will present progress over what they have done in the past few weeks on the model developments and data inputs, which have been some of the topics that we have discussed in the previous meetings, including data validation. We have documented all of your comments and concerns and requests of information to be included on the model, and I want to assure you that all of that has been passed to the new principal modeler, and there will be continuation to that, just getting ahead of some of the concerns that you might have before we start off the meeting. And we will also include the scheduling, the timing, the timeline for the following committee meetings. We have a few more that have put on the calendar, and we are preparing for those ahead. This meeting will be a little bit different, given the amount of information that we want to cover in this specific meeting and the limited amount of time. What we are proposing for this meeting is to let the new principal model present all of the information they have so that we can guarantee and assure that all of what they have prepared can be shared with all of you. And then that won't take much time, and then we will open the round for comments and questions. So the request for all of you will be to wait until we get to that stage, and if you have any comment or question, please take notes. Take notes so that we can cover that at the right timing. That is, we are implementing this process, so again, we can cover all of the material that has been prepared. Are we in agreement? Sounds good? Okay. So having said that, I will pass it over to Pradeep, the new principal model, to reintroduce the team. And
hello, everyone. I'm Pradeep Mugundan. I'm a regional director with Spheros Environmental. My background is in civil and environmental engineering. I have a PhD in civil and environmental engineering, and I have more than 20 years of professional experience as an environmental consultant. I've been modeling for almost 25 years now. I've modeled I've developed and applied models in various contexts, estuaries, coastal ocean, lakes, rivers, and reservoirs, and so on. So look forward to working with you all on this, and we acknowledge that there was a change that was unanticipated, but here we are. And our goal is to continue to serve you and help you get through this process. And so look forward to your comments, inputs, and getting to know you all a little bit more. Can we go to the next slide, please? So we'll talk briefly about the team change. Really, the main change is just me. The rest of the team is the same. And then we'll cover some details on the modeling team, the organization chart, just so you understand the full team and not just who the lead modeler was previously. We'll talk a little bit about modeling updates, and then we'll talk through what our proposed schedule of running the modeling scenarios are. Can you go to the next slide, please? Well, actually, I can do that. Sorry. So here is the organization chart as it was in our original proposal at the time of award. Right? We had Jordan Furness as the lead modeler, and I was actually slotted in as the technical advisor to the team. And my role primarily was to provide oversight and quality control. So that's why, you primarily saw Jordan, you didn't see me, because we wanted to have a fresh set of eyes looking at the modeling work. And obviously with the change in, well, before we go there, the rest of our team, actually, you can see that there are several talented modelers who are already on that team, who will continue to be on this team, including my colleague Shahab Karimi for here, he has a PhD from University of Nebraska, and he's been modeling for 6+ years now. Shahab, yes. So, and then we also have other modeling support staff in our other various offices. I'd also like to point out that, DSI, who's the developer of the EFDC Plus model, has been on our team, will continue to be on our team, will play a very central role in some of the key model enhancements we've talked about, right? It's come up in previous meetings, so the dynamic exchanges and ship traffic and so on. They've also been, helping us pretty extensively with some of the recent requests that we've had with some grid enhancements and so on. So they'll continue to be in our team. But post-award changes, obviously last week or so, we had a change. Jordan is no longer with Spheros. So I took over as the lead modeler, essentially. And then we also, even prior to me taking over as the lead modeler, we had Hazen and Sawyer's team join the Spheros team right from the beginning of this project, post-award, right? And so we've had, Amin here and Tim Osting, I think he's on the phone. So both of them been heavily involved throughout this process. They also bring local experience right here from Corpus Christi. They've worked in this area. And so that's, again, that continuity will remain in terms of the progress that's been made and all the input that we've received so far. They've been in these meetings, they've listened to you all, and we're constantly coordinating through and incorporating all that feedback. So that's, just wanted to point out that, it's a pretty extensive modeling team. It's not just one person. And, a lot of people were backing up Jordan in the past, and they'll continue to back up me as we continue to make progress here. So just a quick confirmation of the project objectives. Thank you, appreciate that. Our scope of work here and continues to remain the same. There's really not a whole change. This is just more a confirmation to restate what our project objectives are, is to take the previous Port of Corpus Christi model and then update that model to current bathymetry, extend the model inputs to recent years, and incorporate some key processes, specifically the dynamic mixing of the discharge and the intake within the inner harbor, right? And possibly also put in ship traffic, but that was sort of a secondary objective. So these are mods 1, 4, and 2, and 3, as indicated in our scope of work and proposal. And then the objective was to apply that model to assess the mixing and transport of the brine discharge to the inner harbor and its effects within the Corpus Christi Bay and in the ship channel, as well as the Bay at large, and Nueces Bay. And of course, most importantly, the other main objective is to seek feedback from you all, incorporate them, have a healthy discussion around the model development and application, so that these scenarios are meaningful to the community here, and that they provide the information necessary for the decisions that are coming up. Okay. Pause here. So what have we done so far? We have completed the grid refinements and we've updated the bathymetry. So one of the key feedback that we've received during our interactions with you all is to get recent bathymetry data incorporated into the model, specifically bring it to conditions now. And we've done that. We've actually incorporated data going through as recent as the first week of April 2026. So we'll go through the updates that we've done to the bathymetry. The other piece is that we've actually, in the previous meeting, we presented the older Corpus Christi model grid, and then we indicated that we're going to the Port of Corpus Christi model grid, we indicated that we were going to make some updates to that based on this recent bathymetry data. There were some discussion that were specifically centered around, how do we increase the resolution within the inner harbor? How do we incorporate more recent data? How do we better align the model, georeference and align the model? So we'll go through all of that in just a moment. All of those updates have been completed, and the model is, we're almost getting ready to hit go on the actual base case fronts for the model. The second key update, and that's for mod 1, right? That's task 1 of the scope. The second key update is that, we have compiled, the Hazen and Sawyer team has been compiling data under mod 4 for recent years. So the most important update here is that we now have a full set of boundary conditions, forcing functions for the model that have been compiled for recent years, from 2019 through 2025. And so, which is great, because that's, we now have a full grid for current conditions. We also have all the forcing functions for the current conditions. So we're going to make a proposal on how we want to run the baseline model. Just as a reminder, the full set of boundary conditions include the tidal forcings, all the point sources within the inner harbor and Corpus Christi Bay, the freshwater inflows in Noso Creek and Nueces Bay, Nueces River and into Nueces Bay, and then the meteorological data, right, which is your wind speed, wind direction, air temperature, rainfall and humidity and so on. So all of those have been compiled. And as we go through this updates, we'll touch on some details on these. The last part that has not been completed, but we are making really good progress on, is the dynamic discharge of the intake and the return, the withdrawal and the return of the brine into the inner harbor. DSI has been working on that. They've already incorporated the code into EFDC Plus. They are testing it currently. So that's the current status of that one. The last one, the propeller effects from ship traffic. That is something that we have not incorporated into the model yet, but we will. And based on all the discussions we've had to date, that is an important process that will affect mixing, but that's not a priority compared to a baseline model and evaluating the brine discharge itself. So we have prioritized that the last. But we intend to complete all of these, within a reasonable time frame here for decision making.
In terms of that last point, that all correspondence and sort of data transfer between Port and Jordan, how much of that is still, how much that would you need regenerated, redelivered?
Perhaps we can have a conversation about what you provided, Jordan, after this meeting,
Yeah.
and then I can maybe I do have a sense for what you provided. Jordan has filled some of them in. I want to make sure that I'm not missing any information.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm because of a conflict, going to be out a little early, I assume, in order to track us down, but I do know that some of my colleagues delivered some of that information over the telephone, so it probably is worth repeating some of those phone calls.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Yes.
Similarly, I provided some bathymetry information, and so I want to make sure that got transferred over as well.
Okay.
So, and maybe it'll get covered when you do the bathymetry update, but I'll make sure if it's not, then I'll talk to you afterwards.
Yeah, I think you were speaking about the dredging material that was.
Yes, the dredge material placement. Okay.
Yes, we have
Great.
that information.
Okay.
Great. Thank you. Yeah. All right. Thanks for the prompt there. We'll definitely touch base after the meeting today. Okay, so there we go. Bathymetry data sources. So this is confirmed bathymetry that we downloaded from publicly available sources, right? So some of these were already in the old Port of Corpus Christi model that were incorporated. That came from the Suntans model that was originally developed. But more recent updates, right? The 2023 Texas GIO, Nueces Bay bathymetry, we've now incorporated that. And most importantly, the last one, number 5, we have very high resolution bathymetry data for all the ship channels within Corpus Christi Bay. That includes Corpus Christi Ship Channel, and then the waterway, the GWIW, the Gulf Intercoastal Waterway. And yeah, and then we'll go through those in the next few slides. And you can see there that it's also very high resolution. It's 1 meter resolution, whereas the other older data were all 10 meters, and so it was not. So it's much more finely resolved. And for the purpose of this model, we've been moving forward. I think our goal is to keep them all in mean tide level. That's the datum that we're going to be using. That's very similar to mean sea level. There's a small correction factor to it. Just so you know, most of the information that I'm going to show in the subsequent slides are all in mean tide level. That's the datum we're going to be using. Okay, thank you. So this figure here shows the merged bathymetry from all these different sources. And I do want to point out that, we got the information that you provided on the design. We didn't incorporate that specifically in here, primarily because it is still design and it's not measured and confirmed bathymetry as yet, right? And so that's why, if that is implemented and, if there is another survey done in those, we can definitely incorporate them down the road. But we do have that information. We appreciate you providing that information. So maybe, let's see here. Would it be possible to zoom into the Corpus Christi channels and then the inner harbor? Yeah, that's good enough. Thank you. So you can see here now. So first thing, the grid is better aligned with, geographically with all the land features, right? And in the previous meeting, we presented that, and it was correct, what was said, that there was slight misalignment in the georeferencing, and it was slightly off. But since we regridded this model with all this new bathymetry, we also had a chance to align it properly. So now it's actually even correctly aligned with the, properly georeferenced and correctly aligned with the land features, which is good. And then you can also see that, the channel bathymetry, you will see that in the next slide. As we zoom in, the channel, all the La Quinta channel and the Corpus Christi Bay, and they've all been updated. So all of those have most recent Army Corps of Engineers bathymetry data. So you'll see that is much more finely resolved in the model. If you can maybe pan out a little bit. Yeah, thank you. So the northern and southern extents are all the same. We didn't really change because we regraded the model. It's practically a new model from that sense, even though but I want to point out that it's the physical domain of the model is still the same. The northern and southern boundary extents of the model are still the same. The ocean boundary is a little bit wider and larger. It's generally good to have your ocean boundary to be sufficiently large so that you don't have any boundary condition artifacts propagating into your main model domain. So that's the reason it's always good to have your boundary far enough away from places that you care about. Although in this case, we have pretty good data to force them. I think that's all the things I wanted to say on this, but we can come back to this if anybody wants to look at this in more detail during the questioning. Thank you. So what you're seeing here are the Port of Corpus Christi model grid on the left, and then the updated model grid on the right. Now you cannot really see the grid at this scale, but maybe I'll just point out some high-level features here. The one on the right has got the updated bathymetry, but also has a new grid at a finer resolution overall in the channel. And you can see that, I pointed out in the previous slide, the extent of the bathymetry in the ocean. You can see that that's a little bit bigger and broader because we have the data to support that, and it's also better to have your boundaries farther out. But the rest of it is almost, very similar or identical to the previous model, right? So if we could maybe, actually there is going to be a zoom. Let me see if I can. Let's actually focus on this one. So this one actually shows the inner harbor in more detail. And then I also have a subsequent slide that really shows the current grid with full detail of the inner harbor.
I can't read that. What are the colors?
Oh, sorry, can
Sorry.
we,
Need
the
better
colors are the bathymetry, and the scale is on the top. So is it possible to zoom into the scale so everybody can see the? Yeah, let's look at, maybe the one on the left and right. We could show the left first and then the right. Maybe you can, yeah, thank you. All right, so the one caveat I would add here is that the datums are not necessarily the same between the old and the new. We didn't know like what the datum was readily from the old bathymetry information. So just keep that in mind as you look at these colors and the scale. So the old model goes from negative 1.23 to negative 55.774, right? So that's about, 56, 55 feet at the deepest locations in the channel predominantly. And you can see the red and the orange parts are all relatively shallow, right? So those are mostly the bay, the New Essex Bay and the Corpus Christi Bay locations. The orange and yellow tinges that you're seeing in this. Could we go to the pan to the right?
Just to make it clear, Pradeep, the colors are not comparable between.
Correct, yes.
Between the two.
The scales are different, the datum is also different, datum could be different. The ones on the right are all mean tide level, like I mentioned. Everything new is mean tide level. But what you do see here is, now the deepest locations are, if I can read that right, is that 82 or a 62? 62, right? Yeah, thank you. I don't have my glasses, so I'm trying to squint here. So you can see, so actually this is great. If you can sort of pause right there. See, now you see the channel, the inner harbor channel being represented really well. So that's number one. And then number two, you see the number of segments in the inner harbor across the grid. So now we have like anywhere between, I would say like 8 to 12, depending on the width of the inner harbor location. And then in the vicinity of, is that a laser pointer here? Yeah, there is one, except I might not be able to use that. So, so if you can zoom into the vicinity of the outfall, which is closer to the mouth of the inner harbor. Yeah, right there. Yep, that location right there. Yep. Could we zoom in a little bit more? That's the extent to which we'll show it in the next one. But what I do want to show here is, it is even more finely resolved horizontally as well, because we want to be able to resolve the location of the intake and the discharge. We do not want them coming, right next to each other, right? So you want sufficient separation between the two. So we've tried to make the grid resolution even finer in this location. And you can see that, with the new EFDC Plus, we're able to do this. It doesn't propagate all across New Essex Bay. I think it'd be on the other side of the bank, right, right across on the other side. It's on the other shore, yeah. It's on the. Well, we just have not, I didn't put the locations on this one, I should have.
All right.
Okay. Could we, well, actually, I could do that.
So what?
Go to the next slide. All right, so now this is a bigger picture of that inner harbor. So maybe we could zoom into that same location here in the new model grid. It'd be a little bit clearer. Yeah. Okay, so this is in the vicinity of the discharge. Now if we could maybe pan to the right into Corpus Christi Bay, we can also show that the bathymetry information has been updated throughout the channel in Corpus Christi Bay. And you can see the darker, deeper channel. Can we continue to pan to the right, please? Oh, that's the extent of it, okay, so we stop right there, okay. No. So that continues all the way out to the oceans, right? All that data has been updated in the channel has been, is better represented in this. And you can also see that, you know, the resolution of that, the channel is finer now in the, from the lower side of the channel to the upper side of the channel there. And that helps us get that slope, represent the slope a lot better in the model than how it was being done previously. We had three cells across, now we have a lot more. So that, and that is true for most of the ship channels, I think, you know, we have a better representation of them. Okay, so I think those are all the grid refinements primarily, and then of course we can come back to this and answer questions on these specifically. I'm sure you all have questions. But I'm going to just continue here to get through the main, you know, sort of give you an overview of what we have here. So given all these updates, one of the things that we're proposing is that, you know, our baseline simulation be with reference to recent years, and we're proposing 2023 and 24. It could also be 24 to 25. We're open to discussion on that here. That, you know, this has to do with information we have currently available. There is continuous salinity data available from 23 in portions of 24. There's also salinity data available in 25 for validation, so we can actually run the model for more recent years. And all these inputs are already ready to go. So there's no reason why we would want to run it for 2010, 11 and compare it there and then bring it back to the future, like back to now, right? There's also a mismatch in doing that. With all the updated bathymetry and everything, it's not realistic to expect the model to be able to reproduce 2011 conditions because we're using 23 to 25 bathymetry. So it's much more meaningful to just validate the model for current conditions with the data that we have currently. So that's sort of our proposal. We're open to discussion on this. If there is any, you know, concerns or input on that, we're happy to take that during the discussion time.
I think I, for one, will just say that there's been a meaningful change in bathymetry between over
Yes,
that time
we
frame,
noticed.
like an acute change, right? So, I mean, I think it actually introduces a lot more variability to look back
Yes.
that far.
Yeah, it actually adds uncertainty more than it actually adds value, which is why we were like, let's keep everything consistent, and that's sort of a change we decided to propose today to see, you know, to get your input on that. And that was also one of the comments that came repeatedly in the previous meetings too, and so we took that into account as well.
So the one question though is to make sure that 23, 24, whether you are actually capturing the full extent of the modifications. We have to look back and see when the channel improvement project in the Inner Harbor was actually materially complete to make sure that that early timeframe, 23, right there, that could capture some of the transition where the Inner Harbor was only partially deepened. So want to make sure
Yeah, no, good question, and we'll get back to that, but I will just point out that here is you see the data, the channel data is from October of 2025 to April of 2026. So I'm assuming all of those updates are already into that harbor deepening.
Yes, but if you're looking at if you're trying to validate on
right, so just a grain of salt, yeah.
23, 24, those would not yet be complete in 23, 24.
Correct.
So Jeff, to your point, I think the validation needs to be done in 2024, basically.
Yeah, or 25. Again, I can't recall exactly when the project was complete all the way to Tule Basin. So, but the validation should be temporarily after the completion of the channel, obviously, right?
Right, and if we run the model for 23, and if we're comparing to the data in 23, we should acknowledge or recognize that bathymetry is more recent now and that the harbor was not deepened at that time. So we have to caveat the results or potentially keep that in mind. Thanks for that clarification.
Excuse me, would you say that from the 2010, 2011 timeframe to now that the bay has become shallower due to silting in from inflows?
I did not do a detailed comparison of the 2010-11 bathymetry versus what we have now. That was, you know, we could do that, but it was, you know, given the short time, we didn't prioritize that.
Yeah, if you can, it'd be interesting to know if it got shallower.
Yeah.
I know one of the original reasons for using 10 and 11 was that there was really detailed data collection on the water flow in that time period, and that's why we're going to use that time period. Do we have data like that, every 5-10 minutes, currents in Inner Harbor for 24 and 25?
When you say water flow, what exactly do you refer to?
Which direction and the speed of the current in the channel?
So the channel by itself is not a boundary condition. The boundary condition are like way downstream and the flow. So the original model was all hourly. It was not 5 minutes or 15 minutes. Every input to that model was hourly based, and this model is also hourly based.
I'm not talking about this model, I'm talking about the other models.
No, yeah.
So we're not taking into account current in a
Are you
model
talking
on
about
mixing?
velocities, water velocities?
Yeah, water velocities.
Yeah, I don't believe, we have data from 2020, but that is still a different bathymetry, right?
Right.
So here is the disconnect. We can run the model for a different period. We can compare it to those velocities, but if your bathymetry is different, your velocities are different, right? It's an apples to orange
understand.
comparison. So which is why, for applying it to current conditions, we have sufficiently useful data.
So you're deriving velocity from the bathymetry and tidal data?
The model will calculate that, yes.
Or in wind, I assume?
Yes.
Okay.
So the model will do detailed hydrodynamics with the current bathymetry, current wind forcing, current tidal data, and it will provide estimates of velocities in very fine resolution in space and time.
Do we have any data to compare that to verify it?
Not to my knowledge, right? So from 24 and 25, I don't.
Not
believe
for
we know.
velocity, but we have data for water surface elevation, salinity, and temperature.
Yes.
Okay.
But you cannot validate your model because you do not have the ADCP, the current data then, is what you're saying for the modern.
No, I can validate the model to water levels, salinity, and temperature, which are all essential and critical components that also dictate what the velocities will be. So you have other lines of evidence that we can use to validate the model. We just don't have velocities.
So, in other words, if your salinity and temperature and water surface elevation works, that implies that your velocity also works. Because if velocity doesn't work, definitely your salinity doesn't work.
Or your tidal stages and all of those other lines of evidence would be wrong in the model. I'm going to move on, and then we can come back to this discussion, so just so that we get through what we need to get through. All right. Okay, so that's the proposed change to our baseline simulation, right? We are not proposing any changes to the enhancements. Those are going to continue as proposed originally, which is to put the dynamic mixing. And just as a reminder for everybody, the model always dynamically represents a withdrawal, but when you put it back in the current EFDC plus model, it's a static input. You specify that before you begin the simulation. So it's not, it doesn't recognize what was pulled out and what goes back. It recognizes what was pulled out, but it's blind to what comes in that changes over time, right? So the role of the dynamic mixing is to essentially apply a real-time conversion for the return, the brine return into the Inner Harbor. So you take some from the Inner Harbor, the desalination plant uses some of that portion for to create fresh water. Then you have a concentrated brine discharge. And so whatever that concentrated brine discharge that is coming out is going to vary in time, right? So that's what this new capability will do. And I think there were questions about the power plant withdrawal and discharge into Nueces Bay as well. So it would apply to both, right? So we could apply that to both of them. So that is, the coding has been completed for that. We're testing it before we can implement it in the full model, but that's a key to us. That's probably an important process refinement that is necessary for the, for simulating the with desalination plant discharge condition. So the second update, of course, we talked about this, we do want to, we're gonna continue to implement some level of ship traffic and its effect on mixing of the brine discharge within the inner harbor. So primarily what we're thinking at this point of time is we would look at the ship traffic data that we get from you, Jeff, and in your team. And then we would maybe identify a representative or, quote unquote typical, like some level of bounding estimate of like, here's the largest ship that goes through, here is, more average ship that goes through. And then we will simulate that ship traffic for different tidal conditions, right? How does it show during a spring tide? How does it show during a slack tide? And how does it show during a neap tide? And maybe without freshwater inflows. That'll give us sort of a range. We wouldn't do like a whole year simulation for that perhaps, but it might be a more shorter duration simulation. And that would give us a sense for what is the extent of mixing we would anticipate, under these different ship traffic conditions. So that's conceptually what we're thinking at this point, and that's how we intend to represent ship traffic in the model. And again, like, the other items are a bigger priority for us, so we'll need to get through those first before we this work's happening in parallel, but we'll prioritize getting the others done first before we get to this refinements. Okay, then, so here are the 2019 through 2025 data that we compiled recently for the freshwater inflows. So the left side is what was used in the Port of Corpus Christi model in the 2010-11 period. 2011, as you all know, is a pretty dry year, but 2010 was also a very wet year. The one important thing I would like to point out is the scale of the flows on the y-axis between the two figures. The left one goes to 12,000 CFS, whereas the right one stops at about 3,000 CFS. So it is. It's quite a bit skewed in that sense. We just pulled that figure straight out of that modeling report, so we didn't recreate it. The more important thing here that I want to point out is for the recent period, for 23 through 25, both the flows are generally on the lower side, right? And 25 is the last block there. That's probably the driest of the 3 years. And so that's a consideration when we think about, which year we want to simulate. So that's something we can discuss based on data availability as well as, the freshwater inflows, which is a critical condition for the simulation. We wouldn't recommend, doing a wet year necessarily, right? Because those are high flow conditions. But if, there's also only a finite amount of time for us to get through a lot of model simulations. We also want to be cognizant of that. But I do want to point out that 2021 was a relatively high flow year. And that's, if there is interest, that's something that we can revisit down the road in time. Okay.
Is one being picked over the other for the model?
We are currently leaning towards 23 and 24, possibly including 25 or 24 and 25 as sort of, critical years, relatively critical years. Yeah.
While we're on that topic, I just want to clarify something. The quality of data is also important, but for the input to the model, I just want to clarify that 2023 and 2024 are like 98, 99% relying on observations from NOAA gauges and wherever data is available. 25 has a lot of missing data that we fulfilled them with some other models like HICOM or SCISM. So the quality of the input data is much higher for 23 and 24. 25 has some data that we are confident that they are good, but nothing is as good as observation, right? So just want to clarify that.
Yeah, I mean, that is an important concept. That was one of the reasons why we started with 23 and 24 and not 25. I mean, it's something that we can come back to.
I was gonna say, can we come back to that during the discussion just to make sure that we're not missing anything that is available? I mean, I know we've talked a lot about data, but it'd be worth revisiting that if we have time at the end.
Absolutely, yes. Okay, and so here are all the point sources and withdrawals. The figure to the right shows all the sources in the inner harbor, and then the figure to the left shows the full model domain, right, on all the sources. So Hazen team has compiled all the, they've gone through the discharge monitoring reports for each of these. They've compiled all this information. I think you sent that around as well, right, the table?
Yeah, just one clarification. This is kind of like a live document, so every day we have some modification to it. It's not finalized yet. That's what I'm saying. Is like we received some comments. There are some QA/QC going on, so we will get to through the final. But I can say this is like probably 95 to 97% ready to go. But don't quote me on it. It's not fully finalized. We will give you all the fully QA/QC version of it. So.
Yeah. Thanks for the clarification. So you can see here the various sources. I'm actually going to go to the next one. So just point out here one thing, that the yellow squares are the intake permits, right? So those are the withdrawals, and then the black circles with the yellow outline is the discharge, right? That's actually permitted. We do want to explain how we are representing these in the model. So there are 114 outfalls overall and 5 intakes. Like I said, we reviewed DMR data, thanks to Hazen team. They've done a great job on that. And then in the inner harbor, we applied a filter that, sources with flows small. We basically used all sources with flows greater than 0.25 million gallons per day. And then for the outside the inner harbor, we used all sources with flows greater than 1 million gallons per day. And the rationale here is that, sources smaller than that, are likely to not have any noteworthy impact in terms of the hydrodynamics. And so we were trying, this was a data reduction exercise primarily. And then for permits with multiple outfalls, the outfalls were consolidated and routed to the closest model grid, right? Because you have like different outflows coming. Yeah.
Just one clarification, the last one. There are some permits in particular that they actually have 2 discharging points. So we looked carefully at the permits to say, for example, just as an example, outfall 1, 2, 4, and 5 is going to go to this route, and then 2, 6, 7, and 8 going to the other one. So we consider that. We also treated differently the stormwater permits. If the outfall is dedicated to stormwater, we kind of separated that, because when we assign a salinity value to those permits, those are going to come with 0 or 1 to kind of represent freshwater versus the ones that are going to actually have some salinity.
Okay, very good. And then we didn't go into full details of all the inputs that Hazen has compiled, but I would just maybe give a very high-level summary of the other pieces of information. We've also compiled tidal data that's ready to go, and those are 15-minute tidal data, right? That we're going to have
hourly
tidal data, and then we've compiled meteorological data, which we said in the previous slide. One thing I'll note here is one of the comments that came up in the previous meeting, the Far-Field Committee meeting. There was concern about using only 1 meteorological station from the airport. We've actually expanded that, and now we have 6 stations, right? Yeah, 6 meteorological stations.
Just clarify, wind is 6 stations. For the meteorological other ones, we actually consolidated into 1 situation, because the area is not that big to consider different solar radiation or other atmospheric parameters. For the variation is not that much, over 30 miles basically. But wind is definitely 6 different locations. Everything else is just 1 single condition for the entire domain.
So again, that's an important improvement, in terms of the 2010-11 model to this one, because now we can represent wind-induced waves and other forcings.
Can you just clarify where the tidal data is coming from now?
Tidal data is coming from the various gauges at NOAA. So they are mainly coming we have like 4 different boundary conditions. We use 2 in the Gulf of Mexico, the Bob Pier and the Aranzas Pass NOAA stations, and then there are like station on the, I think, Rockport for the north side, and there is one in Laguna Madre. I cannot remember the name of it for the south side.
And for the Aransas Pass, we're still using a 50% attenuation, correct?
For the Packery one, yes.
Packery one,
For the
Packery.
Packery, we use the
So the
50% of the
other
main outlet as it was in the previous modeling.
Very good. Sorry, I have a proposed modeling scenarios, but I'm talking about inputs. So I'll continue talking about inputs for another moment here. We also have salinity and temperature forcings compiled for the model at these boundaries, right?
Yeah, I need to clarify on those two. Salinity and temperature are more sparse compared to the water surface elevation. So we use a tiered approach or hierarchy approach. Wherever there is observation available, whether through NOAA or any other sources, we use that. If that was not available, we switched to SCISM model developed by TWDB that is fully calibrated for the entire coast. Then if that was not available, we switched to HICOM, which is a global model that has some data. So there's like a tiered, we scripted some code that actually goes like, okay, observation available, great, no, then go to the switch to SCISM, no, switch to HICOM.
So just so I understand, you're building a model upon a model?
For missing data, yes.
Okay.
But we believe that those models are high quality. It's not like a not validated, calibrated model.
Okay, so in terms of validating this model, I was hoping to circle back to something you said earlier, which is that you mentioned that there's no current velocity data by which to validate this and that it was unimportant. And granted, I'm not a modeler, but while we were sitting here, I hit the literature a little bit, and pretty much every paper I found said that you need not only salinity and temperature, but you need current velocity measurements. You need to validate with your water level. There's a whole lot of factors coming into play here. So I would just like to hear more about how you're actually going to validate this model, especially hearing what you said about filling in gaps with model data. And then on top of that, I just want to circle back to, when Jordan showed the quote-unquote validation of the 2010, 2011 model, that really wasn't a great way of doing validation, because all it was some salinity points here and there, some of which didn't actually fit the model data, and it missed a lot of the statistics that you would usually see in model validation. So I'd just like to hear more about how you actually intend to validate this model.
Yeah, we can go into the details. So we have some backup slides that we can pull up and show you what data sets we have and what our approach to validation will be, if we could come back to that question. Yep. Okay, so I think that's all the inputs we covered, right? Yep. So in terms of modeling scenarios, right, this was going to be a main focus of this meeting. So we just wanted to bring that up and sort of put forward this proposal to you all. What we're thinking here is that, again, that 2023 to 24 conditions, we can come back to that, like Amin explained. There's good rationale for having those years as our base years, but there are some bathymetry differences that we need to account for in doing that. So that's, something we can discuss here. So that's what we're proposing as our baseline conditions. And then for the scenarios, what we're proposing as the first set of scenarios would be a baseline condition with no mixing from ship traffic, right? So this is just current conditions as is compared with and without discharge. So this is sort of a conservative representation of existing conditions. In reality, there is probably more mixing in the channel because of ship traffic, but we're not really considering that as our baseline condition, right? So this gives us a conservative representation of existing condition, and then when you simulate that with the discharge, the brine discharge, then it gives us a conservative estimate of the brine impacts. So that's sort of our first set of scenarios. The second set of scenarios is you do the same thing with ship traffic, right? And then you determine, like, what is a more realistic representation of the existing condition, and then what is a more realistic estimation of mixing and dispersal of that brine plume in the inner harbor. So those are sort of the basic scenarios that we are proposing. Now, the question is, which are we content with doing it for 23, 24? Do we want to, do it for a different year like 25? So that everything is apples to apples in terms of bathymetry and other things. Now, one thing I will note is that some uncertainties tend to offset, so you can actually still use, even if, despite having some uncertainties in the validation and other things, doesn't make the model as a tool any less useful, right? For the most part, if you're able to validate key features of the model, like, can it simulate the tides correctly, can it simulate the overall salinities correctly, then you would have reasonable belief that the model can simulate conditions with and without the discharge reasonably well. What we're interested in is not the absolute value itself, but rather the relative differences from baseline to the model, right? So some of those uncertainties in the baseline model would also carry forward to the model with the brine discharge, and they would tend to offset. And this is very common in terms of model application. This is an acknowledgement, that most modelers would say, like, no model is perfect. If somebody claims that their model is perfect, my answer always would be like, don't believe that model. Because these are mathematical simplifications of very complex physical processes, right? And then we are making a lot of averaging and approximations. And I say that because, specifically to address some of the questions that Mike brought up earlier about, how are you going to apply this model? How would we have confidence in using this model? And it is very relevant from that perspective, and that's why I want to put that forward now, and we'll come back to this. So again, on these scenarios, if there are questions, we can come back to the slide, discuss this in more detail. But I'm going to move on here. So here is our proposed timeline. 2 weeks from today, we are, I think we're in a very good spot to come to you to present the baseline. Well, it says 24, 25 here, my apologies. We actually went back and forth on 23, 24, and 24, 25 in our internal discussions. Whatever the two baseline years are, we hope to come back and present those results with no brine discharge. This would essentially be a presentation of the model validation, right? How is it performing relative to tides, relative to temperature, and relative to salinity information? So that would be the first presentation of the model results. And then in that meeting, if there are any concerns or additional changes, tweaks necessary to the model from this committee, we'll take that, we'll incorporate that feedback. And then in 4 weeks' time or 2 weeks after that, from May 7th, we'll come back to you with a full set of modeling scenarios that we put forward in the previous slide, right? So the discharge with the dynamic intake and also some estimation of the propeller wash or ship traffic on mixing. And our goal is to present these preliminary results to you on May 21st. Get your feedback on it. If there is any still lingering concerns, we take those, we address those, and then come back with a final set of results and present those on May 28th, right? And then make recommendations on June 2nd to the City Council based on these findings. There will be a final deliverable, which is a report. We anticipate that is going to come in on schedule as the original proposal, which would be the end of June. So we still anticipate keeping to that schedule and wrapping this up as originally proposed, which would be the end of June. I think that's most of the stuff. Yep. So now we can go back to questions and discussions. I'm happy to,
Before passing it over to you, I just want to list all of the matters that have been of interest so that we can organize and you can prioritize. Kristen has brought to review the available data that they are considering in bare detail. Model validation here with Mike Wetz. I bet that you would like to hear more about the different scenarios that Pradeep and the team is proposing, and also the timeline. So that is just 4 topics that I have listed just to align with all of you. So,
Okay. I had 3 questions. First off, can you give us a detail of where Jordan left off and what you're reusing? Did you restart?
So I think Jordan's intent was to use the 2010-11 model and then essentially make some targeted refinements to that grid. What we've done since then is, because we've compiled all this bathymetry information, it was actually far more efficient for us to just regrid the model and then create a new grid, which is what we did.
How far did Jordan get? Did he get to any results?
As I understand it, again, I took this over last week in full level of detail. He may have done some simulations himself. I don't know to what stage they were advanced, and so I do not have those results.
Because 2 points, obviously, the work was paid for, and I think it would be a good point of transparency to show us what he got. It's just more information. Secondly, I wanted to, on the scenarios, again, because time is crunched, I think if we're trying to get at, are we going to kill fish? We're concerned a lot about stratification and spatial salinity pockets. And so as you get into that, one of the reasons I keep pointing to that outfall into Nueces Bay is that the ship channel isn't a great fishery per se. We're concerned about what happens to the bay, and particularly where the deposits in there. My concern is that, what does it look like? Are the areas around, particularly where that power plant discharge goes, do we end up getting some sedimentation or some stratification in those areas? And then if you do you have enough grid refinement in those areas to really tell? You're getting very detailed results in the ship channel, which, I guess per the Cormix models that you brought up too, we're interested, as well as the plume. But I would say that, from the ship traffic, you're not going to send ships out if there's no predestined ship traffic to happen for business, right? And we arrived at, there are times when there's no ship traffic. So the worst case condition is without ships turbulating the water in terms of that areas of some higher saline water pocketing due to its greater density. So I would say that in priority, I think you stated it right, that you're going to go after this first, and it'll be interesting to see if ship traffic, disperses that somewhat. But in the priority of getting to these results in that time frame, I would say if you're looking and seeing some areas that are pocketing higher salinity at the bottom, that maybe your focus says, let's go look at those a little tighter and adjust the mesh if you can to resolve that versus, finding out if the ships are going to take care of it, which they, during some time frames, wouldn't be there.
No, that's a fair comment. I think that's why we're prioritizing it the way we are. We start with a conservative condition, we see what the effects are, and we will make a comparison not just within the inner harbor, right? We will compare it within Nueces Bay, within Corpus Christi Bay. We'll compare the salinity with and without the discharge, and see what those changes are and differences are. And our recommendations would be based on those differences that we're observing on whether there is a perceptible change or not.
Yeah, and again, we don't want to just be looking at bulk numbers. We want to be looking at, are there areas that are pockets that are different for having the discharge and not discharge?
Yeah, and to build on that point, right, that's, we wouldn't just look at it on an isolated average basis. It would be more on under a, an epi.
Let's have one mic on. I'm seeing a couple of mics and we're getting feedback.
Just in order that we are with Brad, then we can go Mike and then David.
Okay.
And Sharon, yes, of course.
So I'm just going to finish my point on that one. So when looking at the results, right, like it's not just going to be, this on average, we're not seeing any change. It'd be more like under an EP condition, what does it look like? Under a flux condition, what does it look like? And then are there, we can look at our annual tidal levels and then, compare it at different times of the year as well during a dry condition versus a wet condition. So we intend to do all of that. That's at least what we're envisioning as of now. And we can sort of present those findings as and when we have them. Mike?
Just a few questions. So has there been any reconsideration of adding dissolved oxygen?
No, that is not in the scope of our work.
Okay. Second question on the model validation, since you're going to be presenting an initial round of results on May 7th, will you also be presenting your validation results? So some of the commonly seen statistics that we do for model validation?
Yeah, so let's get to the model validation. Thanks for bringing that up. Could we, Jose, would it be possible to go to the backup slides? Yeah, let's start with that one right there where you have your cursor. So these are all the data sets that we are considering using for validation. Okay, and then these, there are 2 TCEQ stations within the Inner Harbor that has depth profiles, about 11 of them overall from 2019 to 25. Most of them are actually towards the 23 to 25 period. So we will be using them, but with a little asterisk that Jeff pointed earlier, like, if it is 2023 condition, then we have to recognize that the deepening may not have occurred by then. We also have grab measurements a little further out in the Inner Harbor at the nav bridge. There are 3 depth profiles, but there's more, surface salinity measurements that we can compare to. The most important data set there is going to be that USGS station right outside the mouth of the harbor within Corpus Christi Bay. That has continuous high frequency temperature and salinity. In fact, that's a pretty good data set. That's probably the most complete data set of the sources we have. Much better than the 2010-11 data sets that we had. Those, as you pointed out, those were all point measurements at that time, right? Now we're having more improved high frequency measurements that we can compare the model to. Then we also have high frequency temperature information at NOAA Lexington Station, which is just to the north of the USGS station within the bay. That also gives us water level data, high frequency water level data. So we'll be able to compare tidal simulations and whether we're properly attenuating the tides within the bay and so on with that information, as well as the heat flux, whether the model is getting the heat flux right.
There's a salinity station in the middle of Nueces Bay that is tied into the agreed order. I don't know what the data is on that.
Yes and no. So that particular station collapsed. It's no longer there. We're trying to figure out who owns it. Well, we figured out who owns it, but how we can rebuild all of that back.
Okay.
So that doesn't exist anymore.
When did it collapse exactly?
Yeah, maybe the end of 2024,
Okay.
sometime around there.
And there's a couple of stations in Nueces Bay, right? Like Salt 01, Salt 03, Salt 05?
Yes, there are stations, but the one that Carl was talking about, that one that we used for the agreed order collapse.
So, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I don't know whether it would be helpful, but I did provide, there's a station that we fund back up in like the back part of the Nueces Delta, that definitely would have data from this time period. I think I sent the link for that, but it's called New 2. It's also maintained by Conrad Bleacher, but it's another salinity. Anyways, but
any additional information where you think there is data available for this period, please let us know and we'll include that in our validation.
The aquarium guys have a ton of everything.
One thing that I want to emphasize is for the purpose of validation, we need to make sure that the data is QA/QC.
Yeah, right.
So,
That's
for example, the TWDV1 is not fully QA/QC, so we need to be extremely careful of what time period we can use it. Also, the methodology that they actually calculate the salinity is important because, PSU versus PPT, or like the method that because no one measures salinity directly, is specific conductivity and temperature, you use equation to convert that to salinity. So those are like the important things, and also like how continuous the data. Back to your point, Mike, that if you have like maybe 5 points in a multi-year simulation, you cannot provide any statistics from those 5 points. It has to be like a continuous comparison, so you can calculate the RMSE or the bias or like Nash cycle for whatever other validation metric that you want to calculate. So if you have one single point that is measured 5 years ago, 3 years ago, and that's just one single point, that's not going to help with validation.
Yeah, that's my point exactly. So if there's not enough data there to validate the model to give us confidence in what the model's spitting out, then we really need to be out there collecting more data before we start popping out scenarios that we don't know if they're validated.
Correct, but we are confident with this, we have enough data, continuous data, that we can do the validation. Whether the model is going to perform well or not, that's a different question, but we have enough data now.
So that's what I'm asking. By the next meeting, can you provide us with, some of the basic information on validating the model?
Yes.
What goes into that?
Th-
Okay.
That is our intent. Actually, Jose, would you mind scrolling down to, and I want to caveat, but a lot of these figures, take that with a grain of salt, no pun intended. Actually, can we go to the next one? So this is the USGS data that we will validate it to. So as you can see here, between 23 through 25, the green is the salinity to the y-axis, and then the red to the left y-axis is the temperature. There is this is a pretty decent data set, right? You have good coverage pretty much through all of 2023, a good amount of 2024 and 2025. There are some gaps, but you do have large periods of time over multiple tidal cycles where you can compare how the model is doing against the measured salinity. So this sort of information is very critical in assessing overall whether you have a bias or not, right? Like as opposed to a point measurement, which while useful, it will show very good, important trends. You may not get is there a sustain, over a tidal cycle, are you biased, high bias, low? Those sort of things would be harder to assess.
Okay.
Nueces Bay, we didn't find a whole lot. We maybe found some specific conductance data, but
You mentioned it was at 50 ppq last time we had that.
Can you use your mic, please?
Could you turn on your mic? Yeah, where's that data, Mike, that you mentioned coming from?
That's the station that I was just referring to that we maintain or pay for the Conrad Blucher Institute to maintain. And then I would think if we're looking at 23, 24, SALT 3 would have been around for most of that time. So, I'll send those. I sent those links, I think, to Jordan, so I'll just make sure that they get over to y'all as well.
Yeah, we need to have that.
to the extent that we have data, we could definitely make those comparisons anywhere in the model domain.
So just a few more questions. I'm sorry, I'm hogging time here, but so the scenarios you showed, those are only focused on basically ship mixing, but those don't account for the environmental variability in the system that you would want to test with different scenarios. So for example, with the changing return flows from wastewater, that is certainly a potential perturbation on the system. You won't have less fresh water going into the system. Or if you have changes to the agreed order, that will affect how much fresh water over the long term is going into the system. So, the other issue here is that, again, we're focused on this very short time frame when you consider that this plant's going to be operational for 30 years. We have water temperature that's increasing. That will affect the solubility of oxygen in the water. That will affect potentially salinities. You have longer term changes in this system that will not be accounted for in just a 1 or 2 year scenario. And I've raised these issues since the beginning. I strongly feel like we need to be propagating out this model, to test these longer term scenarios. So.
If I could just make a comment, we talked a little bit about it last week, but a couple of comments have been made about the agreed order, right? There's no request to change it, so we can't advise the modelers to predict something that may not happen at any time in the future. I mean, there's nothing to account for except for what is currently in place.
You're absolutely right, but I'm just using that as an example. There are many different environmental scenarios that we need to be considering and testing for here. Whether it's, the 18.2 year tidal regime, or increasing water level, sea level on the Texas coast, the increasing water temperatures. There are so many factors that are kind of bearing down on this system that we're not considering at this point. So we really haven't had a good, solid discussion about what scenarios we're testing. Ship mixing is not an environmental scenario that we need to be testing with this. I mean, it's important, no question, but there is environmental variability that we really need to have a discussion about in terms of what scenarios to test.
Mike, could you, again, trying to get at the heart of our worst-case conditions, would give us probably the best information or basis to go forward with. So, for example, the minimum case of flows would be the case where there's no agreed-upon order flows happening. So I'm just offering as kind of a pathway to get to as best of information as it can in this time. If we assume worst-case conditions, I don't know, some of these other factors you have, could we take temperature, for example, expected in the future and put a worst case on this?
Yeah, I think these are discussions that we probably need to have and probably should have had in more depth at some point. So only one final comment. Have we agreed that this is going to go through an independent peer review before we look at these results and put stock in these results, which is how we would typically do things in the sciences?
I can tell you our peer review process internally, so we have three different.
Yeah, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking
Right,
about when this
so
goes out to somebody who is completely non-conflicted, who would take the modeling code, the modeling results, and really delve into it to make sure we're getting this right. Have we agreed to that?
It's not part of the process that we've laid out in front of this committee, no.
But it was suggested in previous meetings. It's on the record.
Okay. It's not, we would have to discuss further. I mean, it's not part of the scope or the plan.
Okay, so that's just for, that's how we typically have confidence in the work that we do in the sciences. So.
One of the things that we approached this process going forward is to, and it was an initial discussion here, is to have, there were two proposers for the RFP. They were Spheros and Hazen. And working through all of that, the decision, Spheros made the decision to bring Hazen on board as a sub-consultant. I do want to remind everyone that there were just the two entities that proposed to be part of this process.
Right, but that's not the same thing as an independent peer review.
I'm just letting you know what the interest was among the modeler community. There were two proposers for the project.
Can I address your earlier question about environmental scenarios? So by bringing the model to current conditions, we're already baking in some of that environmental change that has already happened to date, right? And so in many ways, any sea level rise or temperature change that has happened is reflected in our current simulations. Let me clarify before on what I want to get through. The key differences, and I maintain this because this is relevant for a future environmental scenario as well. The uncertainties in environmental forcings, which is what you're getting at, applies to both the base case as well as the with discharge scenario, right? If we're finding that between those two, the differences in salinity are really small under current conditions, those, a 0.5, parts per thousand is suddenly not going to change to 4 parts per thousand under an environmental change scenario within reasonable constraints, right? and pair that with some conservative estimates of, okay, now how does this look like under different flow conditions, different times of the year, different tidal conditions, you're still well within the range of what you might see in that environmental scenario. So in many ways, I want to sort of think through, like, this comes up all the time, and I'm not opposed to doing environmental scenarios at all, but how realistic are you in the global climate model projections? Is that uncertain, like the uncertainty in those model projections that you can downscale and put on this is probably far greater than the range in which you're going to find your modeling results, right? So I think what is more critical is what is the relative difference between the baseline and with the discharge scenario under a range of conditions, current conditions.
What I'm going to suggest is that you put out as quick as you can a set of initial conditions that maybe even Mike's and his larger team could look at, and then do a sensitivity analysis, run the variables up and down and see what the impact is. And then from that, you could easily come back and say, this looks like it covers those potential conditions.
Well, I agree with that. That is a very good, solid approach in general. The only sort of tricky thing about that is that, if we arbitrarily increase the temperature or arbitrarily increase sea level or salinities or whatever it is that we want to do, we can force whatever we want to the model, right? But the question is, like, how much of that is going to be grounded in some level of, like.
Well, that's what I'm saying, that you let him and his team look at it and say, this is a range of reasonable things that could occur, and you could run them up and down and say, from that, then we'd be able to say this doesn't really matter too much in terms of the final results if this goes this way or that.
I mean, we can definitely consider that. It's just going to depend on timing, and we have a very limited amount of time. But in principle, I'm not disagreeing with you. I think that's a reasonable way to approach uncertainty, right? Is to test the sensitivity of the model to different conditions. I just want to make sure that when we do that those are still grounded and it's not, arbitrary.
That's what I'm saying, let him pick the numbers.
Right, but we have to make the recommendations based on those numbers, right? And if those are arbitrary, then we cannot base our recommendations on that.
I just want to go back to the comment that I made in the last meeting, I guess. It all goes back to the resources that we have and time that we have, right? Yes, theoretically, with infinite amount of money and infinite amount of time, we can run every single scenario that is out there. But I'm going to emphasize each run for 2 years is going to take 66 hours, right? So just put that in perspective from now to May, whatever that we have our meeting, and just think how many scenarios we can run, and then what is possible. Yes, if you want to extend the project until next year and then put more budget on it, sure, we can do more. But for the time that we have right now, we need to be very careful about number of scenarios and what we can run, what we cannot.
Yeah, I mean, that.
I was after Mike, right? And then Sharon? Okay. Okay.
So just to follow up then, I mean, that's exactly the point of this committee, though, which is to raise these concerns and guide this modeling effort. And we've been raising these issues from the very beginning, that there's this artificial time constraint on doing this right and getting an answer that we feel is scientifically credible. And so you just made our point right there, which is that we have a time crunch, so we can't do all of this work. So, I mean, I don't know what else to add to that. I don't need to add anything to it.
All right, so I'm very interested in the study on what the propellers do. There's been discussion that, this study is not a pure science study. This is an engineering project that you all are the independent modelers to look at whether the work done on the permit is accurate given all the public feedback. The City of Corpus Christi Water Department is paying for it. By state law, they are not allowed to spend their money on anything other than providing water to the customers. So this is about aiding the construction of a water supply project for 500,000 people that supplies water consumption for 500,000 people and that supplies plants that provide ibuprofen for the Western Hemisphere and jet fuel and gasoline and plastics for most of this continent and parts of others. So that's the scope. I know there are people that want to fund pure science out of the city budget. I think that's a general fund expense. You're not allowed to use water funding for it. So I'm very interested in what the ships do, because there has been discussion that if in real life there is a problem, you know, I'm trained as an economist, and the first thing they teach us on modeling is that all modeling is useful and all of it is wrong. And so, because it's very difficult to model human behavior, it is impossible to model human behavior. This information and the different scenarios, I think, are incredibly important and useful for when this plan is turned on, and if a problem is manifest, how we solve that. And so, you know, when we had the presentation last time, I made a comment to Jeff, who is nearby me. I said, well, you know, looks like if there is an issue, we should buy the SS swizzle stick, and if there isn't ship traffic, you know, if when there is ship traffic, there's no problem, and when there isn't ship traffic, there is a problem, we can buy a ship and go out and drive it around to stir it up, if that's an issue. And so in our different scenarios, I had mentioned we can do, you know, it would be nice to see ones with different mixes in the blending, because that is the, you know, increasing the intake volume is the first thing that you do if there is an issue with salt buildup. The second one is, you know, you pull some of those other wastewater sources that are nearby in and blend it on shore, and then you have a less concentrated concentrate. So I'm very interested in those kinds of models. If you want to do a worst case scenario, the worst case scenario is that all of those wastewater discharge sites on the ship channel don't exist anymore because they do not have water supply, and therefore they are not generating discharge. And so if you want to do a worst case scenario, great, fine with me, but it's got to have all that stuff turned off. Now, my last thing is, I noticed in the report on the previous study you guys did for the port, the baseline salinity was different than observed conditions. And one of the things that I noticed was that there was a lack of inflow rainfall data. And so I guess my question is, you know, if you can derive current data, and we have data on what the discharge is from Oso Creek and from Nueces Creek, because those we do have monitors on them. But those are only part of the rainfall flow from land. There's several different, you know, the entire North Shore is not included in the data set for this model now. Everything north of 37 that doesn't go into that goes directly into the ship channel isn't modeled, and everything kind of probably northeast of SPID that goes directly into the bay, and all Flower Bluff is not modeled in here. We're not using any data from that. And that is a huge amount of water, of freshwater inflows. Is there a way to derive that data? And if not, what do we have to do to eventually create this, as over time this model gets honed and used over and over again?
Yeah, you essentially need, are you talking about direct precipitation runoff from the shoreline, along the shoreline?
Right, what goes in, instead of what goes into a creek, what goes into a drainage ditch and then out a drainage outfall?
I mean, some of it presumably comes through your, you know, stormwater inflows, and, you know, those are, some of the point sources capture some of that, like, but that is limited only to paved city areas, right, where that has a catchment basin, a sewer shed, or a stormwater catchment basins. But there is direct runoff, right, like from the watershed. That would require a separate watershed model that would simulate the watershed processes to estimate, you know, what the runoff is for that are not coming through dominant, you know, creeks. My suspicion is that that would be a relatively small portion of the water budget compared to the tidal inflows and you know, the other freshwater sources that we're directly representing. it would be, again, I want to just say like that, but we were not scoped to estimate what that is in within this time frame. But
You
that is
could-
something that is a future refinement for the model.
I've used, there's an EPA stormwater calculator is sort of a rough thing. In order to have something in for that, you could use that against the annual rainfall for the downtown areas available as well, so.
Wouldn't it cancel out though, if you have it in the base case and the results case, and you're
Correct.
looking at the differences, it would
Yes.
cancel out?
Yeah, so those uncertainties, like, that's why I said, like, some of the uncertainties are these are what I would call second order uncertainties, perhaps. I don't want to say that for sure because we've not actually done a
Well,
comparison of the data, but,
okay, let's get back.
Sorry, before jumping on to a different question, I just want to point back to Dr.
All
Sharon.
right, I'm done. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Sorry, Dr. Sharon, then we can go Carl and Carrie and Deanna. Sorry, just bringing some order.
Okay, I've been saving my comments and questions, and I think a couple of comments first. First of all, I think we have to be careful with what we're using as a baseline. You're mentioning it's a reference. So if you model 23, 24, you're using that as a reference.
Correct.
When we think of baselines in the environmental sense, we have to be very careful because they shift. We're in the middle of a drought, right? So this is where we're starting from in terms of the modeling. We can't forget that. So you replicate a couple of years, and then if the validation, and I want to come back to that, is robust, we can say, okay, this is what is going to happen under these conditions. We don't know what is going to happen under other conditions, as Mike has been mentioning. We don't know what happens, for example, if we have a lot of freshwater inflow, which could cause and contribute to stratification in the system and maybe hypoxia. So I think I just wanted to redefine what it means in the baseline sense, because we have been talking about, and my understanding is that, the science is important here. And the science is not about getting funding to measuring things, and I think it's just the wrong approach. Or the wrong thing to imply that the reason we're saying, why don't we have more measurements of temperature and salinity in the bay, is because we want money to sample. I don't think that's right. I think what we're trying to say is, if we don't have the data to validate the model, make sure the model is replicating at least current conditions, 23, 24, appropriately, how can you ask the scientists to have any sort of assessment of what could happen to the ecosystem? And that's what we're tasked with. At the end of the day, it keeps coming back to, let's see what the science says. Well, the science, we can only say something if we're fairly convinced that the modeling is robust. And I think, and I have to say that you've made a lot of progress since the last meeting. I think the presentation you have given is a lot more detailed, that I'm really happy to see the bathymetry is now in there, that the grid is adjusted, the resolution around the different areas is much higher. It'll give us the ability to see what happens in Nueces Bay and in different parts of the system. So I think there's been a lot of progress. Transparency in terms of where you want to, or which stations you have for validation purposes. It seems that there's been some communication that didn't get, it was lost in the transition of leadership, that we need to make sure that you have those data for validation purposes. I had mentioned the ship channel stations, which also have sea level, temperature, salinity. Those are QA/QC'd. You're having the boundary condition being forced from the coast. Just take those into account. Let's be as convincing as possible. That's a comment. Scenarios, I think, are really important. One of the good things and beautiful things about these types of models is you can switch on and off things, right? So, for example, it would be good to see what happens during a high flow event or a high temperature event. I understand that you can't do everything under the sun in a very limited time, but there are conditions that could cause problems that we would like to assess. I wanted to go back to what was said about the flow in Pack Reed Channel. Did you say it was 50% of the flow in the Aransas Pass? Or I just didn't understand.
Not the flow, the water surface elevation, the tides are 50% reduction.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. One of the things that you mentioned with your timeline is a presentation to the City Council with recommendations. What do you mean by recommendations? And I would like to be clear on what the modeling team is recommending to the City Council and what our role in this committee is in terms of recommendations regarding environmental impacts.
Yeah, I think I'll go ahead and share some feedback on that. The report back to city council is a briefing from the modeling team on the model results and the process that they've done to conduct the model, the results of the model, key validation, was it validated, is the data validated, those kind of things. And then also I envision that there would be shared input from this committee to the council as well. Not sure exactly how that would be compiled or presented, but I think that's an important component also.
Are you done? Okay, so I have a list of questions. So the first one is the grid structure looks a lot different. It's less contoured and it's more kind of jagged around the edges. I was wondering, will that produce any numerical artifacts having that kind of jaggedness, or is there any downside to having it less contoured?
It just looks, to the extent that they terminate, like the reason it looks jagged is because you have one extra cell going into adjoining land, right? That's a better representation of the shoreline given the bathymetry. So I don't think it'll introduce any artifacts it'll probably give you a closer representation of the shoreline. I feel like that's, those don't look very smooth for the eye, but from a numerical perspective, that's just no land cell is just an inactive cell. Right.
Okay, Pradeep, I want to add something that EFTC is really good with wetting and drying algorithms. So if there is the water is not on that piece, it's going to shut it off and not consider
So
it.
basically inactivate the cell. That's
Okay.
what would happen.
And then we were talking about velocity validation earlier. I think it is important to at least confirm that we're getting in the right ballpark. So if we could use some sort of measurements, even if it's before the dredging project. I know there's a few ADCP measurements that have been done in there. And I know the Water Development Board did an intensive survey in the year 2000. It's full depth column. Just something to show that these are reasonable velocities that the model's producing.
And Pradeep, I think we discussed that a little bit internally, that we probably want to take a look at those ADCP measurements and kind of compare with what we have to say, okay, it's not crazy different, the pattern is the same, it's not a 5 order of magnitude difference, right? Of course, the situation is completely different, but if they're similar enough, we can just say that, hey, yeah, we're getting the same pattern.
Well, I mean, my understanding is we have 2020 ADCP data, correct? There is some 2020 ADCP data. I didn't want to put, again, that's 5 years prior. And,
right.
We could run a simulation with different bathymetry. We could do the comparison, but what I was trying to say earlier on the ADCP data comparison is that if your bathymetry is different, then your velocities will be different.
For sure.
Right? And so that's why you have to take those ADCP measurements with a grain of salt. Unless we go back and redo the bathymetry and then run it for that year with the modified bathymetry, it wouldn't be a reasonable comparison. Now, again, but to your point, we can still look at it and then say, are there areas where the bathymetry is not changed substantively, and are we reasonably reproducing that? Now, we've not dug into the ADCP data to that level of detail to really be able to speak yet whether we can do that comparison, which is why I didn't want to put something out that, that we've not vetted out yet. So.
Cool, and then on the base runs, I was wondering just want to make sure that the power plants have a dynamic salinity discharge, because the dynamic desal modeling will happen later, but I wanted to make sure that the baseline isn't just putting out a static salinity from the power plant and that it's tied to the intake.
Yeah,
Can you all confirm that's going to happen?
That's fair. So the baseline, we will, we are hopeful that by 7th we'll have the dynamic discharge up and running and tested. But in case that doesn't happen, we'll rerun the just to clarify to Sharon's question, by baseline in the narrow context of how we are defining it for the purpose of this project, not as a true environmental baseline. We will rerun it, and then with the dynamic salinity, without the discharge, but with the dynamic mixing, right, or dynamic intake and return, so that new Nueces Bay discharge reflects the conditions in a time variable manner.
Okay, I just want to make sure when we're subtracting them out, it's going to be
Right,
apples to
they should be
apples.
apples to apples, 100%, that's a fair comment, yes.
Okay, and then can we pull up that map with the intake and outfall locations? I wanted to make sure that the Nueces Bay Power Station intake was in the chip channel.
That was switched, actually, that was one of the QA/QC on that map. It's actually the
Okay.
intake and discharge was
Okay.
switched. Yeah.
Cool. And then also, I was looking at the sheet or the Excel file you all sent out with the data inputs and the locations for the outfalls and the infalls. And so like, I think the Inner Harbor intake is 17 foot on the sheet y'all have, but on the permit, it's 20 feet deep. The outfall for the sheet y'all sent was 20 feet deep, but on the permit, it's 32 feet deep. And then same thing, Nueces Bay Power Station, on y'all's sheet, it shows 19 feet deep, but on the permit, it's 20 to 45. So, I wanted to request that it's at least 30 or 32 feet deep.
That's perfect. That's what exactly we are asking for you all. Thank you. So we will consider that for sure.
Okay, cool. I was wondering, for each, I guess y'all are just doing 23 to 24 right now is the plan. Are y'all doing multiple runs for different combinations of projects or anything like that?
You mean for each of the scenarios we laid out?
Like CC Polymers by itself, Inner Harbor by itself, and then CC Polymers and Inner Harbor together?
We are going to use DMR, the actual reported value, so it's going to be whatever that they reported as reality.
I mean, like, the city's considering two different projects, and I was wondering if you're gonna do runs where it's just the projects by themselves and then those projects together, the desalination projects.
I think that's something that's pretty true.
Can you elaborate on that? I'm not right.
Yeah, so on the ports model that they did in 2023, they had about 4 desalination projects, and they did about 18 runs looking at different combinations of them. And so I was wondering if y'all are gonna do like, more than one run. So one of them could be, for example, like, you do the baseline, and then you do one with the Inner Harbor discharge. And so then you would also do one with the CC Polymers discharge, but it's without Inner Harbor, and then you do another one with Inner Harbor and CC Polymers.
So I was just gonna add, so CC Polymers is a permitted desalination plant.
Right.
So I think Jason's making a valid point. We can talk more about that, guys.
Yeah, I mean, there is, to the extent that it's already in our scope to do the different levels of, or different combinations of the desalination plant discharges, we'll incorporate those. And if needed, we can separate them out. And again,
Right.
I want to be cognizant of the number of models we need to do. So if there is an easy way to come up with a more, if there is specific interest in the CC Polymers by itself, we need to know what that impact of that is.
Right.
Then we can run that. Again, I just want to be cognizant of how many things we're adding to our plate between now through the end of the month, so.
Right, yeah, so I would like to request that we do the baseline in those 3 different runs that I put out there.
Are you asking them to do your work?
I'm just asking for us to have the information we need for city council to make the decisions that are coming up.
We'll go,
Okay.
sorry,
Yeah, I want to make a comment about CC Polymers. I mean, it is a permitted plant. When I said that, that means they can operate it with or without city involvement whatsoever. So that, I mean, that's a critical input. So we can talk to the modelers about it. In other words, they are permitted to operate, they can do it. It has nothing to do with the city at this time.
Are they operational right now? So, are they reporting to the EPA that how much?
No, so the plan is not complete. So we may have to just get some updates on their timelines on when they may come online. It is fully permitted. but it's not functional and operational at this time.
Okay,
Sorry, Deanna is next. I know that time is limited, so I don't know if you have any remaining, and we can go Deanna, Sharon, and
just real quick, y'all mentioned the possibility of doing a wet year, and I just wanted to request that y'all do a wet year because that could have more stratification and stuff like that.
Yeah, Deanna, please.
I was just waiting for my name to be called,
Sorry.
okay?
Apologies for that.
Okay, I got three things I want to address real quickly. First of all, I want to remind the city and the public that this committee did not choose the proposers. That was one thing, y'all were going back and forth and you were trying to explain the process to Mike, and I think Mike understands that. Secondly, I wanted to be on this committee because I thought this study was going to be based upon science, and you need the right data to get the right outcome. You know, I'm here because I'm representing the Hillcrest area, and that's a concern to me, that if we're not gonna use science to get the proper data, then what are we doing here? I mean, we got a lot of intelligent people on this committee, and their concerns are valid. And some of the stuff that they have been asking for, we were basically told we're gonna include, that's gonna be included in some of this stuff. And third, there was a question that Brad asked that was kind of, smoothed over or diverted and deflected. He asked about the work that Jordan has done up to now. And basically, to me, a proper answer was not given. He's been doing a lot of work into not to use some of his data. That would kind of put it behind as well, put the study behind. I don't understand why, if he was a part of Spiros and he did work, why wouldn't you know or include the data into the stuff that you're doing now for this study?
Can I, so first, I'll address the science question. This is a scientifically rigorous model. We're assessing the impacts from first principles, right? And this is a very systematic way to do this. And this is how, any independent academic institution would have gone about this as well, right? They would have come up with a similar model and come up with a range of scenarios. I think a lot of the earlier questions centered on how much can we do in the time and resources we have allotted, right? And what were we scoped to do? It's not as, there are different academic questions you can raise. Some of them are highly relevant, and we'll reconcile them to the extent that we can into this model. Model is a tool for decision making, right? And then it's a tool we're building, and it can be used in the future. It's not like we're done with the modeling and the city has wasted its money. The city can give that to whoever they want in the future and then have them enhance it, apply it again to different contexts or specific management questions, right? We build and design our model and scenarios to the questions that have been put to that. And that is the scientific process. What are the scientific questions we're looking to answer, and what's the method we're doing? And we've elaborated a range of sort of an approach, we've outlined an approach and a method to do that. So the second question about, what Jordan previously did was not being used, I don't think that's the case here. All of what our team is doing is building on the work that was presented previously. Every single piece of information that was compiled previously, we're using that. What we were saying is that we are actually preparing a better model than what we originally envisioned at the time, Jordan was presented to you all. Doesn't mean that we've not used that information. We absolutely have used all of it and more. And in fact, we've taken your feedback and incorporated that. And it's a more robust model than what you would have got, what we originally envisioned. And that is, again, because we're integrating science and a broader team's effort and not just one person's effort, right? And so I really want to make sure that, we don't lose track of all the work that is going into building this model.
So Pradeep, I just want to add to what you mentioned. If we were going to start from scratch without what Jordan did and then not leveraging what he did, it would, at least on our side, it's going to take 3-4 times more to compile this data set. Because we know exactly where we should look at and update and all of that, so that saved gigantic amount of time, at least on our end. I'm just talking about Hazen part, not like the other part, but we definitely leverage every single piece of work that was up to that point that he was on that team, so.
Right, I understand that, but that wasn't the answer originally, but thank you.
And so we have a lot of scientists on this committee, which I'm really glad that you guys are leading this, and we have some lay people from the community. That would be us over here mainly, with David Loeb added in, I suppose. Backing up a little to discuss this change in leadership, to ensure that the true scientific findings of this modeling are made available to the public and the city leaders as they make future decisions about desalination projects located in the Inner Harbor. My first question to Jordan was, during the first meeting, was about bias and conflict. Since he worked for Texas Water Development Board and still has contacts and relationships there, and since the Texas Water Development Board is funding the loans for the Inner Harbor project, plus since Spiros is a for-profit business that makes a profit through its multi-million-dollar contracts with municipalities like the city of Corpus Christi, I asked Jordan if he could ensure that regardless of what the results show, can he ensure that his report would be free of bias, even though the city hiring him has a vested interest in this modeling results showing a lack of harm to the bay. So Pradeep, my question to you is, well, Jordan answered yes, that he could ensure that, and I think many of us trusted him. Pradeep, you're an experienced modeler, right?
Yes.
Right. Have you personally ever conducted a modeling project that resulted in, because of the modeling, the proposed project was found to be detrimental and resulted in the project being abandoned or canceled? If so, can you share these specific modeling projects that resulted in a negative finding, or have all your models resulted in a positive finding for your client?
So just to clarify, as an environmental professional and as a licensed professional engineer, I am obligated, ethically obligated to report findings as I find it. I'm, regardless of who's paying for that work. If we present model findings as we find it, and that's our job. We don't, we don't try to say it's we apply our interpretations to it to say this is the difference, here's what it is, right? And then we may make a recommendation based on our best professional judgment. And that would be independent of what the city wants or what the far field committee wants in terms of like which direction you want the results to go. We'll present the results as we see it, based on our judgment, based on our training, and based on our experience doing this in various sites, right? To answer your question about specifically about like, have we made a recommendation that has resulted in a project not being active? I've done many modeling projects. A lot of them we've made recommendations, and a lot of them, they don't go forward for many other reasons, and I don't know if it's because of our findings. And there are projects that have been implemented too, right? And so it's not something that I can give on the spot, but I can give that some thought. But generally speaking, to address your primary concern of like, the city is paying for your work, are you going to give an answer that the city wants? And my answer to you is, and my commitment to everybody here is that, we will present science as we see it based on our training, our ethical obligations to report our findings, and our within our skill sets, right? We're not going to go out on a limb to say something that we're not, that we cannot stand behind. So we'll stand behind our modeling work, we'll stand behind our recommendations based on what we're seeing, based on the information we have today.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
I just want to help with something perhaps, and that's, we got 66-hour runs. What about the opportunity to engage some larger compute resources? I can help you with some of that. Maybe there's some here at the university, but if you prepare the input decks and you have the compiled code, what about running that on parallel systems? How many systems can you do, or how many parallel runs can you do today on the hardware you have?
I can take that one. So the EFTC model is already parallelized. So we are already using on 20 cores, and that's the maximum that we found has effectiveness in the computational time. So we ran it on 30, 40, and all of that. The result is that, so instead of 66, you go to 65, for example.
It's not about multiprocessing on one computer with multiple processors in, excuse me, but it's that if you ran it on different compute resources in parallel.
So EFTC is a licensed program, so then you have to pay for each of those seats separately.
So how many seats do you have?
We have one, and you all have one or two.
So we have we have several licenses. To address your question, I think let's say we have 10 seats and 10 different machines that we can run it on. That does increase the number of scenarios we can run, absolutely.
Right.
And so my bigger concern is that it's one thing to crank out model runs, but it's whole another thing to set it up correctly, process it correctly, synthesize it, and then interpret it correctly, right? Which is why we want to be thoughtful about why we are setting a certain simulation up, what is the objective of that specific simulation, right? And do we have the right forcings and inputs to it so that the results that we get out of it is correct?
Right, you just don't need to be waiting 66 hours to start the next one.
Right, so the broader question is it's not just the runtime, it's more the preparation and the thought that you put into setting up a simulation.
Right.
And then the interpretations once the simulations are done, right? We are cranking as much as we can, as fast as we can, to address as many questions as we can, right? But we also want to acknowledge that everything is not going to be possible, and we want to prioritize. So to that end, there are some scenarios we laid out, right? But if there is a real concern about, we really would like this scenario done, then maybe that's something we can discuss on the 7th. What we would really appreciate is I know, Mike, you specifically had concerns about environmental scenarios. If you can flesh out and then come up with here is the input, here is the basis for that, is it possible for you to do that? We can consider doing that. Again, we may not be able to do it for every possible combinations of scenarios, but maybe to the extent that we can accommodate, we'll try to accommodate. But I do not want to make a commitment a priori that we're going to be able to do 40 scenarios, right? So to me, that's my main concern is you can always crank out model runs, but as a modeler, I'll say this, anybody can push a button and get a number. What the important part is, can you set it up correctly? Can you get the correct numbers, and can you interpret it and use it correctly, right? So that's my main concern in terms of expanding this.
Obviously you do that, but when you set these up and you're going to run a high temperature run, you're going to run a salinity at several levels, maybe with some recommendations from Mike and his team. Those have been thought through, so it is at that point, compute resource. That's my point.
Yeah, I mean, to the extent that these scenarios are very well fleshed out, then maybe, and it doesn't get multiplicative, right? Suddenly we say we have 6 different baselines, and then now you have to, do 6 times 3. Then you suddenly have whoa, that's 40 scenarios that we have to process and present findings on in this very limited time. And so that's where I'm trying to narrow down, our goal is to help you all feel comfortable with the impacts, right? But there is also some reasonable constraints that we have to be cognizant about. And so we want to sort of try to balance the two together.
Sorry, Lamont, just following the order, we can go Dr. Sharon, then we can go back to you. Apologies on that.
We wanted to report back about the meeting that we had with experts. We had mentioned here It was a request that was, that came from the committee. And we met last Friday, and we went through the model and what we were asking them to do to help us provide a framework for making an assessment of what the potential impacts could be. The model itself and the approach has shifted since the last meeting, so I want to make sure that what I'm going to read you, which is a memo that we put together with the participation of everyone that assisted, is now a little bit, it doesn't exactly match what you are going to do. I think there's been a lot of improvements to the model, particularly with the bathymetry, being able to work with more recent years, having a plan for validation, which can be included with additional stations, but there's still some gaps that we are concerned about, so I'm going to read this with that caveat.
I'm sorry, can you tell us who the we is? Or who
The
met?
we is experts, and it's here. I'm gonna read it here, exactly for the record. Yep. So, dear Far Field Committee, on Friday, April 17th, 2026, with the encouragement and knowledge of city staff and the Far Field Modeling Committee, as noted in the executive brief from the March 5th meeting and as discussed during the meeting on March 12th, Drs. Hertzka and Wetz convened a group of expert scientists from the University of Texas Marine Science Institute, the Hart Research Institute, and other discipline-relevant scientists from Texas A&M University, Corpus Christi, and a retired Texas Parks and Wildlife Department fisheries biologist. The goal was to establish a framework for assessing the results of the far-field modeling in the context of potential environmental impacts. The modeling plan, as presented by SFERA's in previous committee meetings, was shared with the group to inform its discussion. The experts were informed that early modeling results were unavailable due to delays in the modeling process. The experts expressed their concern regarding the regional water shortages and recognized the necessity of desalination as a long-term freshwater solution for residents. As part of the community of the Coastal Bend, we are all aware of the seriousness of the situation. The scientific opinion we expressed today focuses on the modeling effort itself. The experts reached unanimous agreement that the modeling effort has a high probability of being fundamentally flawed for the following reasons. The model assesses only salinity impacts from the Inner Harbor desalination plant. It does not evaluate dissolved oxygen, which is essential for aquatic life. Previous studies show a tendency towards hypoxia, low oxygen, in parts of Corpus Christi Bay under stratified conditions. Changes in salinity from desalination discharge can contribute to water column stratification or layering, which may reduce vertical mixing and limit oxygen replenishment. Inclusion of dissolved oxygen was recommended by the Farfield Committee early in the process, March 5 and March 12 executive briefs. Without dissolved oxygen, the model cannot detect hypoxia caused by stratification, which can lead to serious environmental impacts, including fish kills. The EFDC Plus model includes a module that can simulate dissolved oxygen as a state variable. Excluding oxygen also prevents evaluation of long-term oxygen changes driven by increasing salinity and temperature. Model validation is an essential first step to ensuring the model results reasonably represent environmental dynamics. To date, the criteria for model validation, which field data will be used to test model accuracy, have not been clearly defined or vetted by the Far-Field Modeling Committee. A preliminary validation using 2010-2011 salinity data from the La Quinta Channel was presented on April 3rd, but it does not reflect current conditions in the Inner Harbor. Validation was aligned with the model's timeframe, location, and conditions. The proposed modeling effort focuses only on short-term effects over 1 or 2 years. Because the plant is expected to operate for 20 or 30 years, modeling should reflect long-term conditions and variability. The model does not include realistic future scenarios. For example, reduced freshwater inflows, such as ceasing Mrs. Delta releases or decreasing wastewater return flows. Other factors, such as increases in water temperature and prolonged drought, could also significantly affect outcomes and should be included. An independent peer-reviewed assessment of the model, the structure, code, assumptions, and outputs has not been confirmed. Peer review is the gold standard for ensuring scientific rigor, as noted in the March 5 and 12 executive briefs. Because of these deficiencies, the experts expressed strong concern that the Inner Harbor far-field modeling approach as currently structured lacks rigor and will not be scientifically credible. Accordingly, the group considers it inadvisable to offer further assessment of potential environmental impacts. So again, please take this into consideration as you are going on with your modeling efforts. This is a group of experts, and I don't want to trivialize the science. I think we take our work as seriously as you do, and our knowledge as seriously as you do. And I think pretty safe to say that nobody wants to see an environmental disaster in the region. So we are, in that sense, supporting of your modeling efforts and putting our best science forward.
Yeah, so just a couple of things that I'll clarify, like you noted, Sharon, that we are bringing the model current. We've showed you the data sets. We've sort of discussed our validation approach, right? We'll use our typical, validation statistics that is commonly used in modeling, like root mean squared error, bias, and so on and so forth. Our assessment definitely is not just in the Inner Harbor, right? Even though that's where the grid resolution and all the improvements that we've specifically done, it doesn't just stop there. The bathymetry improvements are all bay-wide, right? And it's not just within that particular area. So I do want to, hopefully a lot of those address several of your comments. Now, the one unaddressed comment that you brought up is dissolved oxygen modeling. And I can go into great detail on modeling DO. I've done that in many places in estuarine conditions, in freshwater conditions. Modeling DO requires a completely new set of water quality processes and a much more extensive set of data that is it's just not feasible in the timeline that we're talking about. However, what we can do is we can present our stratification and the changes in stratification at different locations in the bay. And from that, you would have reasonable potential to assess, is this going to be a sufficiently large enough stratification that would cause hypoxia or anoxia, right? What we do not know is if hypoxia or anoxia is existing or current. I don't know that, right? And that is not, that is completely outside of our scope to assess. What we can do is the discharge of this brine extending to pockets or areas within Corpus Christi Bay or Nueces Bay that is that is increasing the salinity to such an extent that you're now finding a vertical stratification profile. Now that is something we can do, and we will try to get at that. But that is the extent to which we can assess the risk of hypoxia. Whether or not that actually occurs is that's a whole different modeling exercise, right? Completely beyond the scope of this work.
So just to follow up on that, we have experts who have that additional ecosystem metabolism data, for instance, that could feed into the DO model. But to your question to your suggestion of using just the stratification potential, we shared that with them, the fisheries experts, because Jordan had mentioned that as well, and they felt that was wholly insufficient for assessing dissolved oxygen itself as a state variable and something that plays into fish physiology and whatnot. So
right. So now you're actually talking about multiple layers, right? So fish physiology is built on top of a water quality model, right? The physiological effects on fish and other aquatic life. And so I'm not at all trivializing the importance of that potential issue, but what you can get at is if your stratification doesn't change, it doesn't we need to think about, is that risk any different than how it exists today? That's our job to assess here, right? And to the extent that we can do that, we will do that. We can just quantify it on the basis of risk, or at least give a qualitative assessment on the basis of risk. But what we cannot do is if conditions are already anoxic, and if those are harmful to biota, they are not, all we can say is is there a potential for those conditions to be exacerbated or not, because there is potential for stratification. But what we cannot say is okay, the DO is going to specifically change to this much, right? That is not within the scope of this work. So.
Right, and that's what I think the fisheries experts felt was one of those needed data sets. And you got
are these meetings you guys are having in private? I mean, who is going to them? Is there any sort of, do we get names of people who are supposedly saying these things?
I'll be happy to answer that.
Okay.
This is not in private, in the sense that we put this before this committee, and twice.
Correct.
Before convening our colleagues.
That's my next
And what
step.
I'm not gonna do is give you a list of people so that you can then be attacking them when they.
I'm not attacking them.
When they, out
You-
on their own
I
time,
want to say this.
got together.
That subject
for their
came up.
expertise. Mike and I are the representatives in the committee.
Correct.
If you have anything to say, you can say it to us.
Okay, so this is what I'm going to say to you. Your statement said that this committee asked you to do that. This committee did not ask you to do that. There were
Yes, the
people-
committee did.
There were people on this committee that
There were-
suggested it.
And then we-
This committee has never voted on anything. This committee has never made a recommendation
I
as a
explicitly,
group.
it's on the record, I
And so
explicitly said,
my-
we're gonna do this, is this committee in agreement? I specifically said that, it's on the record, you can look it up online.
We
And
never
the
voted
committee
on
said,
anything
"Don't
like.
do it." Because
Okay,
we-
that's not how
We
public.
did not want to be accused of being.
That's not how public
Let's
decisions
bring
happen.
this back to
You're
a
fine.
matter on the purpose of.
Don't put my name on that, okay?
Let's,
If you want to say members of the committee asked you to do it, I understand members of the committee asked you to do it. The committee as a whole, we did not agree to that.
let's bring this back, please. Let's bring this back to the purpose of the meeting. Let's bring this back. I would appreciate just following on the conversation. Okay, let's go with Lamont.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Since all this is based upon science, and I appreciate the scientists, thank you, Doctor, for preceding me, because from John Q. Public, in April 10th, the workshop, basically, it was specifically stated that hypoxia and PFAS will be part of this particular model. And you can go back online and look at that, because that's what staff had insinuated, because when council person Bond asked that question, and it was stated. So my question to you is, are you going to take in what these scientists had talked about hypoxia and PFAS? You have not mentioned PFAS, so I guess that wasn't even in your discussion or in your model. But I've always said, from an urban planning point of view, I'm going to take my planner hat and put that on, and I'm going to ask you, I know that whenever variables go in, and I'm going to boil it back down to Corpus Christi Bay, in the model that you have, if you do not include all of the data that this particular community, this particular commission had, Foster Model Committee has asked, then it will definitely not be the desired results that we can all agree upon, because this is the stuff that we're interested in, John Q. Public. Thank you.
Can I, Deanna? Doctor, you're correct. It was mentioned in this committee meeting a couple of times. If y'all could take this information, go out, resource it, and bring it back. It was discussed. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Recognizing that we have limited time, we have exceeded the 2 hours. We know that this meeting was loaded with content and discussion. All of that has been documented. Is there any additional comment or question that you'd like to bring up? Aaron, let's go Aaron and Jason. Aaron, Jason, and Kristen.
One question so back in the past, we had it is on modification 2. Originally, it was proposed to be done in late June. How did it get pushed up 30 days? Now, what has changed in that? Manpower, or what was the change?
It's a key component of all the modeling, and so we're trying to wrap up all the modeling work by the end of May, so that June we're primarily documenting what we did. We're not, we wanted to have a full set of results by the end of the month, so when we're presenting it to the committee, the council, city council. So that was the motivation.
On April 10th, there was a workshop with City Council talking about this project. One thing that came up a lot was PFAS, or forever chemicals. And I was wondering if it was possible to sort of model maybe as like a passive tracer that's neutrally buoyant, to sort of see if it will be extra elevated in the inner harbor or anywhere nearby within the next, or near like a immediate mile or two. I know salinity is a tracer,
I
so
was gonna
if
say,
there's an
salinity is your
elevated,
best tracer right there, so.
if there's an elevated salinity level there, then you can imagine there'd be higher PFAS concentrations. My concern is, since it is neutrally buoyant instead of negatively buoyant, there is a higher potential for it to recirculate from the outfall and the intake, which are about 1,800 feet apart. And so that produces a risk of having an even more heightened elevation of PFAS concentrations in the immediate area. So I was wondering if it was possible to sort of look at that a little bit.
Can we look at, can we run tracer simulations and look at environmental fate and transport of, PFAS or other organic contaminants with EFDC plus? We can. Will it be possible with just a hydrodynamic model? That's a challenge, right? So if you want to look at, environmental fate and transport, depending on, PFAS, a broad class of chemicals, right? It's not just one compound that we're simulating, whether they're absorptive or not, whether they are, and so on. All of those processes need to be simulated. And then you need a sediment transport model as well to realistically get at some of the organic, chemicals. And so this belongs to the same class as dissolved oxygen impacts, right? So to really simulate dissolved oxygen, the way you would do it is you would simulate nutrients, you would simulate sediment, benthic respiration, sediment oxygen demand, you'd put all of that in the model. Can EFDC Plus do that? Yes, it's got a eutrophication module. It absolutely can do that. The amount of information that you need to properly constrain and use that model is just enormous, right? You are not, it is not something that you can, just because it can do it, we cannot just turn it on and get an answer that is meaningful. Which is why, we've been repeatedly saying that's out of our scope, because to do that properly and to do that with the full level of scientific rigor will require an extensive amount of information to constrain that model, to validate that model. And it's not a, it's not a model you can build in a month, right? Like even if you had a hydrodynamic model. Each of these components are gonna take years to really get right. And so I want to be transparent about that, just as a modeler and as a scientist, that is why I hesitate to say yeah, you're not simulating DO, can you just give us an answer on DO? No, I can give a risk on stratification. That's the best I can do with the tool we're building. And that's what we were scoped out to do. At the time, the city put out this proposal specifically saying, this is what we want. They didn't say we want PFAS. They didn't say, it didn't say we want DO. So I want to just clarify that so there is a reason, for this timeline, it cannot be done, and the amount of information that we need for that is, I don't even know what information is available, what data gaps exist, and so on. So that'd be a lot more
I can
work.
build on that because I've done PCB dioxin modeling with using EFDC in the Houston Ship Channel. If you want to treat PFAS as another tracer, you're not going to get any different results than salinity.
Yeah,
It's exactly the same.
So,
but if you want to actually doing the PFAS, you need to have the sediment transport and you need to have the participation coefficients among the sediment and the water column. And you need to have the decay rate of PCB dioxide, the PFAS. And then it's also which congener of PFAS you're talking, because that's completely different as well. So definitely by adding a tracer, another tracer, you're not going to get any different results than the salinity.
Cool, good to know, thank you.
Sorry, we are gonna go with Kristen, and we can go back to you, Brad, and then if possible, we can close out the committee
Yeah,
meeting.
I just had a process question, and it's maybe more to lead into our next meeting. So, you proposed some environmental, or some scenarios in your slide. There was other ones proposed by committee members, and so what is, we've talked about how many we could potentially run, so how do we get to that number and what those scenarios are gonna be? And so I'm not saying that we have to, I don't think we have the time to answer that right now, but either that needs to be a large part of the discussion on the 7th, or potentially what maybe even would be better than that is if there could be some guidance from the city staff and the modelers on that before the next meeting, so we could start to think about that. I mean, I guess, just, I'll leave it at that. I just think we need some kind of consensus on how we're going to handle that. Jason brought up a few. I have a few things in mind that we know we're going to change. We need to include those kinds of things. So how do we get to where we're all on the same page on that?
We can touch on that after the meeting and get back to you with an answer. Please, Brad.
I just think we could put this issue to bed about Jordan, rather than generalize it as you alluded to. Just give us, did he get to some output? If all he got to was adjusting the grid, the bathymetry, whatever he did, could you just put out a statement of how far he got and what you're moving ahead forward with? If there were results that came of this, that came out, I think it would put the question to rest, were there results that somebody didn't like? That's kind of the obvious.
To be, right, so to my knowledge, he didn't share any model runs specifically with me, and this was not like a planned departure. So the problem is, that's why I didn't want to say like specific, I have to really go through like all his work to really know the extent to which he did what he did. And I also don't know how relevant that would, some of the last, not the model inputs, not the bathymetry, all of that information, but even if he were to run, let's say, like if he did run a 2010-11 simulation, right? He would not have run, I know that he didn't run a 24-25 simulation, right? Because we're just setting that up. Even if he did run a 2010-11 simulation, it's not directly relevant to what the time frame we're proposing now.
Right, you understand what I'm saying, though. You contract for research, we paid for the research, we like to see the results.
Yeah,
So
and
if he came out with something instead of generalizing it, this is how far he got, this is what it was, it would just clarify that point of it.
Back to next steps, Pradeep, unless you have another comment. Just a reminder of what this group would be potentially looking at in the next meeting, because we know that can be seen in different formats, just to have some visibility right ahead. And to Kirsten's comment, we should be discussing later what could we potentially incorporate within the time frame.
Yeah, so maybe the action items that I'll take for us is like, what, and the only reason I'm pausing for a moment on this is because we don't have a full 2-year run of the model yet under the 24-25 conditions. So I don't want to say what is feasible, but however, we're confident that we can get there by May 7th. So what we'll try to do either on May 7th or shortly before that is give you an estimate of here is what the model runtime looks like, right, for this 2-year period. And here is the set of combinations of scenarios that we are proposing, which is going to reflect more or less similar to this, but maybe if there are some additional scenarios that we need to consider, we'll put that in. And then we'll say, we'll pass that information to you either, I don't want to say next week, but probably by the 5th or 6th, before the 7th, so that you have an idea of like, okay, so this is what we're going to be talking, here is the number of, here is the model runtime, here are the scenarios we're thinking, and then you can take that into account in any additional recommendations that you're going to put forward, and then we can talk at that time, like how we can sort of, work that into our schedule.
Nick, I have a question. I saw something earlier that said there was going to be meeting on the 14th and not on the 7th, and today the schedule shows a meeting on the 7th and not on the 14th. I'd just like to resolve that. I have some planning to do.
Yeah, so we have the next meeting scheduled for the 7th. After that one will be the 21st, and then again on the 28th. So those will be.
As per the presentation today.
Yes, so those are going to be the next ones. Y'all will be getting those invitations out today or tomorrow. That way so y'all can already lock it in on your schedules.
And if I mistype something, Roger, my apologies.
He's not here, so we can talk about him.
That's good, thank you.
That's all for the content we have prepared for today's meeting. We have gone beyond for some time, but we appreciate all of your patience and comments. Apologies if we couldn't keep order of all of the comments. We will try to do more organized way for the next meeting to be able to hear of all of your comments and opinions.
Thanks, everybody.